So there's this bit that Victor Borge used to do, the musical humorist, where he'd be sitting at a piano in a concert hall and start playing at the music that was right in front of him. And it would sound maybe pleasant, but not quite familiar. And he might be plunking out something like this. And you'd be left going, some of the rhythms sound like something I might know, but I'm not quite sure what it is. He'd be playing along, and then like partway through, he would take the music, turn it this way, and continue to play. In other words, he had started out playing the music upside down, and when that's what you start with, you assume, oh, this is the way the music is supposed to go. I'm just not familiar with it. And then when he would turn things the other way around, it was like, oh, no, the music had been upside down the whole time, and it sounded vaguely familiar because the rhythms are still kind of there, even if they feel backwards. But he was playing the music upside down and finally put things right. You know, it's funny how often that happens in the Gospels when Jesus encounters people and what he says to them about God or about God's way of ruling in the universe, God's reign, sounds to them familiar but somehow off. It doesn't line up with their expectations. And when Jesus comes along, he says things that sound upside down to their ears and to their hearts. But when Jesus says them, it almost becomes clear, really, he's the one putting things right side up. But that's hard for our brains to understand. It's hard for our brains to go, oh, I had it upside down and backwards all this time. Take this coming Sunday, we're going to hear this really, really crucial story at the heart of Mark's gospel, where Jesus asks the other disciples around, first, what do you hear other people say about me? And they all recite, well, people think you're like one of the prophets or like John the Baptizer, or maybe you're like Elijah. And Simon Peter, God bless his pea-picking little heart, he blurts out, you're the Messiah. Okay, but Jesus knows that when Peter says Messiah, when everybody else in that room hears the word Messiah or Christ, and for that matter, when most people in first century Judaism hear the word Messiah, they've got a very particular image of somebody who's going to raise up an army, someone who's like a conquering king who's going to take back their country for God from the Romans or from the corrupt Sadducees or from the priesthood or from whoever they think the villains are. When they hear Messiah, they think violent military insurgency to overthrow our enemies and dominate them, to destroy our enemies and crush them. And Jesus makes it clear that's not what it means for him to be God's anointed one, God's chosen, God's Messiah. God's way of ruling the world looks upside down. But in fact, it's simply putting right side up what we had gotten used to having upside down. Now, when Jesus starts to say this to his disciples, and he says, by the way, my way of being Messiah is going to mean taking up a cross and being betrayed and being put into the hands of sinful authorities and put to death. My goodness, this blows Simon Peter's mind, who just had the right words, who said, you're the Messiah, but doesn't understand what they mean, has those words upside down. So he blurts out, oh, this will never happen. And Jesus has to say, you don't understand. This is what my way of being Messiah looks like. This is what my way of embodying God's reign looks like. This is God's way of putting the universe right through suffering love, not domination, through laying down life in self-sacrifice rather than in crushing your enemies or destroying them. It's in the power of love that's willing to be vulnerable, even to the point of a cross. And then Jesus looks at his disciples and says, if you want to be a part of my movement, this is what I'm calling you into. I'm turning the music right side up for all of us, but if you want to follow me, it's going to mean that kind of way of life, of laying down our lives, so taking up a cross, so to speak, and being willing to put ourselves last, to lose our lives rather than demanding that other people lose their lives for our comfort. That's so countercultural. And to be honest, an awful lot of people just couldn't abide by it, and this is why they rejected Jesus. For an awful lot of people, Jesus didn't measure up to their expectations of what a respectable Christ or Messiah was supposed to be. He didn't come in powerfully or dominating or like a bully. He didn't come in commanding wealth and power and status and influence, but is willing to lose all those things. And Jesus sort of makes the point. What's the point of having any of those things if you forfeit your soul, the heart of who you are? Instead, Jesus calls us to be people who follow after him in this seemingly upside down but really right side up picture of how God rules and reigns in the world through love that goes to a cross. This is what it is to be people who follow on Jesus' way. Jesus is not gathering soldiers for an army to rise up and take back a country or fight off our enemies or destroy or conquer or dominate. Jesus is calling apprentices into his way of life that all our lives looks like laying down our lives in suffering love for the sake of the world that God loves. That's so upside down, but it is exactly what the world needs. And maybe amidst all the chaos, it finally brings melody out of the noise we've been hearing, so that out of all the confusion, finally there's a melody we get. Maybe that's exactly what Jesus has been up to all along, and maybe that's what Jesus is among us here too. So join us on Sunday for this conversation about Jesus' upside down, which is really right side up way in the world. See you Sunday.